The night was a living, breathing enemy. Jasmine's lungs burned like fire, each gasp of the damp city air a sharp pain in her chest. Her heart thudded against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the sound of heavy footsteps closing in behind her. They had found her. She had been so careful, but they had found her anyway. The narrow, cobblestone streets of the city's old town, usually so charming, were now a twisting, shadowy trap. She could hear the gruff shouts of the men, their voices echoing off the ancient stone walls, getting closer, always closer. She darted down an alley, her only thought to get to the river. It was her one chance, a dangerous, stupid chance, but her only one. The wide, dark water gleamed under the sliver of moon, its surface swirling with ominous currents. The men burst into the alley's entrance, cutting off her retreat. It was the river or nothing. With a desperate prayer, Jasmine scrambled over the low stone wall and jumped. The cold was a shock that stole the very breath from her body. It was like being plunged into liquid ice. The current, deceptively calm on the surface, was a monster underneath. It wrapped around her legs, pulling her down, twisting her in its strong, cold grasp. She fought, kicking and thrashing, but her heavy clothes were like anchors, dragging her deeper into the dark. The lights from the city blurred above her, becoming distant, winking stars. Her chest screamed for air. This was it. This was how it would end, not in a dramatic standoff, but alone and swallowed by the silent, cold dark. Constantino stood on the private balcony of his riverfront estate, a glass of amber whiskey in his hand. From here, he could see everything that belonged to him. The quiet power he held was as deep and constant as the river itself. He was a man who solved problems with a word, a look, a single phone call. His world was one of controlled order, and he liked it that way. The river, tonight, was unsettled, choppy. It matched a restlessness in his own soul he couldn't quite name. A splash. Not a fish. Too big. His eyes, sharp and used to noticing every detail, scanned the water. A flail of limbs, a gasp for air that was cut short by a mouthful of water. It was a person. A woman. And she was losing the fight. He didn't think. There was no cost-benefit analysis, no calculation of risk. His body moved before his mind could catch up. The whiskey glass was set down with a quiet click. His expensive jacket was shrugged off in one smooth motion. He climbed onto the railing, a dark silhouette against the night sky, and dove. The water was a cold fist, but Constantino was strong, his muscles powering him through the current with single-minded purpose. He reached her just as she slipped beneath the surface for what he knew would be the last time. His arm hooked around her waist, pulling her limp body back against his. She was a dead weight, her skin already frighteningly cold. "Fight, damn it," he growled, though he knew she couldn't hear him. The current fought him for her, trying to claim its prize. It dragged at them, pulling them downstream. Every stroke was a battle, every kick a demand on his strength. He used all his power, every bit of his formidable will, to get them both to the shore. He finally dragged her onto the rocky bank, his own chest heaving, his body trembling with exhaustion and adrenaline. He rolled her onto her back. She was utterly still. Beautiful, even in the grip of death, with dark hair plastered to her face like a tragic crown. He pressed his fingers to her neck. Nothing. No pulse. No breath clouded the cold air. A panic, sharp and unfamiliar, lanced through him. He had not fought the river just to lose her here on the shore. "No," he commanded, his voice rough. "You do not get to die." He knew what he had to do. The wet, heavy fabric of her dress was a death shroud, constricting her chest. He couldn't get it off the normal way. With a sharp, brutal tear, he ripped the bodice open, the sound unnaturally loud in the quiet night. He did the same with her thin, soaked slip beneath, exposing her pale skin to the cold air. There was no time for modesty, no time for anything but the raw, desperate need to make her breathe. His large, warm hands pressed against her cold sternum, and he began CPR. The contrast of his sun-warmed skin against her icy flesh was a shock. He counted compressions, his movements firm and sure. He pinched her nose, covered her mouth with his, and breathed his own life into her. It was an intimacy more profound than any kiss, a forced sharing of his very essence. "Breathe," he ordered between breaths, his voice a low, desperate plea. "Come on, breathe for me." He went back to compressions, his hands on her bare skin. He was a man who took what he wanted, but this was different. This was about giving. Giving his strength, his warmth, his breath. A fierce, primal wave of protectiveness washed over him, so powerful it stole his own breath for a moment. He would not let her go. The world could not have her. He bent to give her another breath, and then he saw it. Just as he was about to seal his mouth over hers again, her body jerked. A violent, racking cough tore through her. Water spilled from her lips. She turned her head to the side, gasping, choking, drawing in a ragged, beautiful breath of air. Her body trembled, curling in on itself as she coughed the river from her lungs. Constantino held her shoulders, supporting her, his own heart pounding in a wild, relieved rhythm. Slowly, shakily, her eyes fluttered open. They were the color of warm honey, confused and clouded with pain and terror. They focused on him, on the stranger kneeling over her, his hands on her bare skin, his face a mask of intense concentration and raw, undisguised relief. In that single, heart-stopping moment, the world narrowed to just the two of them on the dark riverbank. The savior and the saved, their forges now irrevocably linked. She saw the hard, handsome lines of his face, the dark, dripping hair, the eyes that held a storm of their own. He saw a flicker of life returning, a soul being pulled back from the edge. And in the depths of her wide, frightened eyes, he saw the beginning of a dangerous, unspoken question. A question that would change everything. The world returned to Jasmine in a series of disconnected sensations. The first was a crushing exhaustion that weighed down her very bones. The second was a deep, radiating warmth that enveloped her, a stark contrast to the river's icy grave. The third was the solid, unyielding strength of the arms carrying her. She was cradled against a chest as hard as stone, yet the hold was careful, almost reverent. Her head lolled against his shoulder, and through her half-closed eyelids, she saw the blur of passing marble floors and the soft glow of elegant lamps. This was not a hospital. The air smelled of old wood, fine leather, and a faint, spicy cologne that clung to her savior. Constantino moved through his home with a single-minded focus, his usual guarded composure replaced by a simmering urgency. He ignored the wide-eyed look from his elderly butler, marching straight up a sweeping staircase and into a guest room far from the main household's noise. He laid her gently on a bed softer than any cloud she could imagine, his hands lingering for a moment on her shoulders before he pulled away. He worked with a quiet efficiency that was both commanding and gentle. He wrapped her in a blanket of the finest wool, its warmth a soothing balm. But the memory of her cold, bare skin beneath his palms was a brand on his mind. He fetched a towel and began to dry her hair, his movements firm yet surprisingly tender. Each pass of the soft fabric was a quiet act of care, a language far removed from the violence he was accustomed to. Jasmine began to shiver, not from cold, but from the shock receding, leaving raw, frayed nerves in its wake. Her teeth chattered. Constantino's brow furrowed. Without a word, he sat on the edge of the bed, his weight causing the mattress to dip. He pulled her, blanket and all, into the circle of his arms, rubbing her back vigorously, trying to chase the last of the chill from her body. "You're safe," he murmured, the words a low, rough vibration against her ear. It wasn't a question, but a command. A promise. Just breathe. It was during this intimate act of warming her, his hand moving in slow, strong circles over the blanket covering her lower back, that his pinky finger brushed against a patch of skin on her hip, exposed by her torn clothes. The texture was wrong. Not skin but raised ink. His entire body went still. The gentle motion of his hands stopped. The air in the warm room grew thick and heavy, charged with a new, dangerous energy. Jasmine felt the change in him instantly, the shift from protector to predator. His arm, which had been a source of comfort, now felt like a steel band. Slowly, deliberately, he pulled back the edge of the blanket, just enough to reveal the small, intricate mark etched into her pale skin. It was a stylized scorpion, its tail curled ready to strike. The symbol of the Volterra family. His most hated, most bitter rival. The family he had been at war with for a decade. A low, dangerous sound rumbled in his chest. He released her as if she'd burned him, standing up so abruptly the floor seemed to shake. The kindness in his eyes vanished, replaced by a glacial coldness that was more terrifying than the river's depths. "A scorpion," he said, his voice a soft, deadly whisper. "You are Dante Volterra's." Jasmine pushed herself up, clutching the blanket to her chest. Fear, cold and sharp, pierced through her haze. But it was quickly met by a surge of defiance. She had not run from one prison to be condemned to another. "I was," she said, her voice hoarse but steady. She met his furious gaze, her honey-colored eyes blazing with a fire he hadn't expected. "I am no one's property. Not his. Not yours. Do you have any idea what your family has done?" he snarled, taking a step closer, his large frame towering over her. "The lives they've taken? My own brother." He cut himself off, the pain in his voice raw and ancient. "And do you think you are any different?" she shot back, her own anger rising. "You think your hands are clean? I know who you are, Constantino. I know the stories. I jumped into that river to escape men just like you. My brother, his cruelty is a sickness. I refuse to be a part of it anymore. I would rather have died in that river than go back." Her words hung in the air between them, a confession and a challenge. She wasn't pleading. She was stating a fact. She had chosen death over the life they offered. Constantino stared at her, his mind reeling. He saw no lie in her eyes, only a truth as hard as diamond. He saw the same weariness, the same soul-deep stain of a violent life that he saw in his own reflection. But in her, it was coupled with a courage he rarely encountered, the courage to walk away from everything she had ever known. The anger didn't disappear, but it transformed, melting into something far more complex and dangerous. The tension in the room shifted, twisting from one of threat into a hot, magnetic pull. The space between them seemed to shrink, charged with the electricity of their shared secrets, their parallel pain. He was close enough now that she could see the flecks of silver in his stormy gray eyes, could feel the heat radiating from his body. Her heart was no longer hammering from fear, but from something else entirely, a wild, thrilling anticipation. "You are either the bravest woman I have ever met," he said, his voice dropping to a husky whisper, "or the most foolish." "Perhaps I am both," she whispered back, her gaze dropping to his lips. That was all the invitation he needed. He closed the final distance between them. There was no hesitation. One of his hands came up to cradle the back of her head, his fingers tangling in her damp hair. The other rested on her waist, over the blanket, right above the damned tattoo. His touch was possessive, claiming, yet still held a thread of that shocking gentleness. Then his lips were on hers. It was not a gentle kiss. It was a collision. A deep, hungry kiss that spoke of rivers survived and secrets uncovered. It was a kiss that tasted of desperation and salvation, of danger and a terrifying, newfound desire. It was a promise and a question, all at once. Jasmine's hands, which had been clutching the blanket for dear life, let go, her arms sliding up to wrap around his neck, pulling him closer. She kissed him back with a fervor that matched his own, a silent scream of defiance against the worlds that had tried to break them both. When they finally broke apart, both were breathless, their foreheads resting together. The storm in his eyes had quieted, replaced by a blazing, possessive light. The fear in hers had been burned away, replaced by a daring, impossible hope. He brushed a stray lock of hair from her cheek, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw. The war outside these walls, the names Volterra and his own, the decades of hatred, it all seemed to fade into a distant, meaningless noise. In this quiet, warm room, with the taste of her still on his lips, there was only her. And the dangerous, beautiful spark they had just ignited, a spark that threatened to consume them both. The days that followed were stolen from a different life, a dream woven from secret glances and the intoxicating thrill of the forbidden. Within the cold, marble walls of Constantino's mansion, a new world bloomed, a fragile ecosystem built for two. Their romance did not just ignite, it exploded into a silent, brilliant supernova, felt in every quiet corner of the vast house. They became masters of a hidden language. A brush of fingers as he passed her a cup of coffee in the sun-drenched morning room. The lingering pressure of his hand on the small of her back as he guided her through a doorway. The way his stormy eyes would find hers across the dinner table, holding a heat that made the elaborate meal entirely forgettable. Every stolen touch, every secret kiss stolen in the shadowy library, was amplified 1,000 times by the knowledge of the danger that lurked just beyond the gated grounds. Their love was a secret rebellion, and every moment felt both precious and perilous. Constantino became a man possessed by a fierce, almost primal protectiveness. He was rarely far from her side, his presence a constant, comforting shield. He, who had commanded armies of men with a flick of his wrist, now found himself ordering the kitchen to prepare her favorite pastries. He, whose name was spoken in fearful whispers across the city, would sit for hours, simply listening to her talk about the books she was reading, about her dreams of a quiet life by the sea. Jasmine, in turn, saw past the formidable mafia boss to the man beneath, a man who carried the weight of his world on his shoulders, a man who had known little but violence and suspicion. She brought out a softness in him, a capacity for gentle tenderness that no one, not even Constantino himself, knew existed. One night, a fierce storm raged outside, rattling the windows. The power in the mansion flickered and died, plunging them into a world of shadows and howling wind. Constantino found Jasmine standing by the grand window, watching the lightning split the sky. He came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and pulling her back against the solid warmth of his chest. She leaned into him, her head resting under his chin. "It feels like the world is ending," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the storm. "Let it," he murmured into her hair, his lips brushing against her temple. "As long as it ends with you right here." He turned her in his arms. In the intermittent flashes of lightning, they could see only each other. He lowered his mouth to hers in a kiss that was not hungry or desperate, but deep, slow, and full of a profound, aching promise. It was a kiss that spoke of forever. In the dark, with the storm as their witness, their connection sealed itself, becoming a deep, burning love that felt as ancient as the sea and as inevitable as the tide. Later, tangled in the sheets of his bed, the room lit only by the fire he had built in the hearth, they whispered in the dark. Their conversations were no longer about the past, but about a future they dared to imagine. "There's a place in the south," Constantino said, his voice a low rumble against her skin as she lay with her head on his chest. "A small villa overlooking the sea. No one knows I own it. The walls are covered in bougainvillea, and the air smells of salt and lemons." Jasmine traced the lines of his torso with her fingertips, painting a map of their escape on his skin. "We could have a garden," she whispered, her voice dreamy. "And in the mornings we'll drink coffee on a terrace, and the only sound will be the waves. There will be no Volterras. No Constantino the boss," he said, his hand stroking her hair. "There will only be us." But their dream was a delicate soap bubble, beautiful and destined to pop. The danger was a constant, unwelcome guest. One afternoon, Constantino intercepted a communication. Dante Volterra had offered a staggering reward for information on his sister's whereabouts. The hunt had intensified. Constantino's own lieutenants were growing restless, their suspicion of the mysterious woman in their boss's home turning into a low, threatening murmur. The walls were closing in. The two most powerful families in the city were searching for them, and their secret sanctuary would not remain secret for long. The choice could no longer be postponed. Constantino found her in the garden, sitting on a stone bench under a canopy of wisteria. The sun was setting, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. He sat beside her, taking both of her hands in his. His expression was grave, but his eyes were clear and resolute. "They are getting closer, Jasmine," he said, his voice low and steady. "We cannot stay." A flicker of fear crossed her face, but she squeezed his hands. "What do we do?" He looked at her, at the woman who had pulled his soul back from the brink of darkness, who had shown him that his heart was not made entirely of stone. He saw his entire future in her honey-colored eyes. "I have spent my life building an empire," he said, each word weighted with finality. "I have gathered power, wealth, and fear. I thought it was everything. But it is nothing. It is ash in my hands compared to you." He brought her fingers to his lips, kissing them softly. "I choose you," he declared, his voice gaining strength, echoing with a freedom he had never known. "I choose a life with you. I will walk away from all of it. The money, the power, the name, all of it. For you." Tears welled in Jasmine's eyes, but they were tears of relief, of joy, of a love so fierce it felt like a physical force. He was giving up his kingdom for her. She leaned forward, capturing his lips in a kiss that was a seal on his vow, an acceptance of his incredible sacrifice. "Then we run," she whispered against his mouth. "Tonight." As the moon rose, casting a silver glow over the city they were leaving behind, they moved with a quiet, determined efficiency. Constantino took only a single bag, filled not with gold or jewels, but with cash and new identities. The empire he had built was now a cage, and he had found the key in her love. At the mansion's secluded back gate, he turned to her one last time. The man before her was no longer the untouchable mafia boss, but a man ready to become a ghost for the woman he loved. "Are you ready?" he asked, his hand outstretched. Jasmine placed her hand in his, their fingers lacing together perfectly. It was a fit that felt like destiny. "With you," she said, her voice steady and sure, "I am ready for anything." And as they slipped through the gate and disappeared into the welcoming darkness, they did not look back. They were choosing a wild, brave, and forever kind of love, a love that burned brighter than any empire, a love that was worth every danger, every sacrifice. Their story was just beginning. We hope you loved Jasmine and Constantino's dangerous and passionate journey. True love often demands the bravest of choices. Subscribe to our channel so you never miss a story. Every click we get helps us bring you more of the dramatic, spicy tales you love. Let us know where you're watching from in the comments below. We love connecting with our global audience of romance lovers. And most of all, we want to hear your thoughts. Were you holding your breath during the river rescue? Did you feel the electric tension of their first kiss? Do you believe a love like theirs is worth giving up everything for? Tell us everything in the comments. Your feedback is what inspires our next great love story.